Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Across State Lines. I'm your host, Danielle. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 10 of the show, where today we will be discussing the 1977 murder of 25-year-old Sigrid Stevenson in Ewing Township, New Jersey. Sigrid was an incredibly gifted pianist who had enrolled at Trenton State College in Ewing Township to earn her master's degree in music education, as her dream was to become a music teacher. Over the summer break, Sigrid decided to go traveling across Canada, and when she returned for the upcoming semester, she found herself without a place to live for a while. Sigrid decided to break into the school's theater building, Kendall Hall, to sleep in their costume shop for a few days while she waited for her host family to return from vacation, when her room would be ready at their home. On September 4th, 1977, at 11:30 p.m., Sigrid was discovered dead on the stage of Kendall Hall, lying in pools of blood with a fractured skull. There was a large pool of suspects that police had to sift through. However, no one has ever been charged in the murder of Sigrid Stevenson, and her death still remains a mystery 47 years later. But before we jump into the case, I would like to remind everyone that Across State Lines is available on all podcast listening platforms, such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, and anywhere else that you might stream podcasts. If you're liking Across State Lines and would like to leave us a rating or a review wherever you listen, it would be greatly appreciated. If you'd like to leave us any feedback, please visit our website and send us an email. Now, let's dive into the case of Sigrid Stevenson. Sigrid Miller Stevenson was born to her parents Peter and Barbara Stevenson on January 24, 1952, in Alameda County, California. Sigrid was the first child born to the couple, and she was raised alongside her younger sister, Sylvia, in Livermore, California, 40 miles east of San Francisco. Sigrid's father, who was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps and went on to be a nuclear chemist, had a love for music, which he happily passed on to his young daughter. Peter taught Sigrid how to play the guitar at a young age, which sparked a love for music and the arts, just like her father had, and she would take this passion and move on to the instrument that she would come to love the most, the piano. Sigrid began to take piano lessons at an early age, and that talent developed and blossomed into her deepest passion, and something that she would continue with for the rest of her life. In Sigrid's school years, she would perform in piano recitals and volunteered for the school's drama department, playing the piano in the school plays. This love of the arts wasn't just restricted to the piano, however, as Sigrid was also a writer as well as a medium artist. Sigrid, or Siggy as she was called by her friends, stated that Sigrid was fiercely independent, a free thinker, and a bit of an introvert. Though she had many friends, Sigrid was known to keep people at arm's length, and much more preferred to spend time on her own. One of Sigrid's favorite activities was to take long walks by herself in the scenic spots of Livermore, where she would find somewhere secluded, sit down, and either write in her journal or sketch. Her teachers at Livermore High School described Sigrid as unique, artistic, eccentric, and one professor even went as far as to call her weird. While Sigrid preferred to focus on the artistic side of life, she was also a very good student and graduated from Livermore High School in the spring of 1970. In the fall of 1970, Sigrid began attending classes at University of California at Riverside, where she had wanted to pursue a degree in music and education. At the time, Sigrid's main goal was to become a concert pianist, but this dream began to shift and change during her time at college. When Sigrid wasn't attending classes at the college, she was teaching at her side job, where she taught the piano to special needs children, which sparked something inside of her. Sigrid had a deep love for children, and during her time teaching, she realized that she wanted to pursue a degree in education so she could become a music teacher. While away at college, Sigrid's parents would often call her and try to persuade her to become more involved with college activities, whether it be making friends, going to dances, or even date, but Sigrid had no interest in anything other than her love for music and pursuing her passion in education. Fellow students said that Sigrid would practice the piano for hours every morning and every night, and if there was an unoccupied piano around, Sigrid was on it. Her peers had admired her deep passion for music and the arts, but they would also come to acknowledge that it was a bit of an obsession and one that could not be derailed or broken. Sigrid graduated from the University of California at Riverside in 1974 when she was 22 years old. After graduation, Sigrid, following her wanderlust, took some time to travel when she wasn't teaching children how to play the piano. In 1976, Sigrid made a life-altering decision. She wanted to pursue her master's degree in musical education, and she knew exactly where she wanted to study at. Sigrid applied to Trenton State in New Jersey, which was located 40 miles northeast of Philadelphia. Sigrid had chosen this particular school because at the time, it was well known for being one of the best music instruction schools in the country. Sigrid enrolled at Trenton when she was 24 years old in the fall of 1976, where she was registered in advanced music classes as a graduate student. Sigrid did exceedingly well in her classes and managed to impress her professors in her studies and her gift in music, and things seemed to be going well for her. One sticking point for Sigrid was her relationship with her dorm roommate, who she didn't seem to get along with, as her roommate found her to be bothersome. This roommate stated that Sigrid did a lot of solo traveling and hitchhiking, which worried her, and that Sigrid seemed to be far too trusting and friendly with strangers. One of Sigrid's favorite places to be on Trenton campus was Kendall Hall, a theater that was constructed in 1932, which housed two theaters, one larger and one smaller, offices, classrooms, and a costume shop. Sigrid would often ride her green bike to Kendall Hall and sneak into the building after it was already closed in order to play the piano for as long as she liked. People who knew Sigrid stated that she would stay on the main stage of Kendall Hall, playing the piano for hours, oftentimes into the late hours of the night or the early hours of the morning, and then slept underneath the stage or crashed in the costume department. Kendall Hall was notorious for being easy to sneak into at the time because the locks of the building didn't lock properly, and security would routinely search the hall for students who may have snuck in there and give them a fair but firm warning to leave. Sigrid herself was caught in Kendall Hall many times after hours, and she was ordered to go, much to her dismay. After Sigrid had completed her first year of schooling at Trenton State, she did a bit of traveling around, but it's unknown exactly where these travels had taken her. After some time, Sigrid returned back to the area and began to rent a room with a professor from Trenton until August of 1977, when she moved out. After this, she began to rent a room with a local firefighter at his home that he shared with his family. However, this man nor his family has ever been identified publicly. Things were looking good for Sigrid, as she had just gotten a job teaching music at Fisher Junior High and would be scheduled to start that fall. In her free time, Sigrid continued teaching music to special needs children and began singing in the choir at the local Presbyterian church. At the end of August, Sigrid, following the deep wanderlust in her soul, decided to take an extended hitchhiking trip throughout New England, through Canada, and as far as Nova Scotia. Though funds were limited, Sigrid kept her trip going by selling sketches of the landscape she was visiting to locals in the area. When Sigrid returned to New Jersey on Friday, September 2nd, she suddenly found herself without any place to stay, as the firefighter and his family were out of town and their return had gotten delayed. With nowhere else to go, Sigrid began to sneak back into Kendall Hall and spend her evenings playing the piano before sleeping in the costume room once again. Classes were scheduled to begin on September 7th, where over 5,000 grad students were enrolled, but the week leading up to classes beginning, the campus was like a ghost town. The weekend prior to the start of the fall semester, only 50 students and staff members were on the campus grounds, and that number began to dwindle when Labor Day was beginning to approach. Over the summer, Kendall Hall was being used frequently as local theater groups would put on plays, and the school's theater workshop used the stage. But the final play of the season was put on Saturday, September 3rd. The play that day had 16 cast members, and 30 people were in attendance in the audience. And a few of the cast members had personally invited Sigrid to be in the audience and watch the final production. Later, when speaking to police, many cast members had confirmed that Sigrid had attended, and afterwards, she had joined the cast and crew downstairs in the basement dressing room for an after party. At the party, Sigrid had spent time talking to the cast members about her predicament of her host family being out of town, and how she would be sleeping at Kendall Hall for the next few nights. Sigrid left the party at 12:30 a.m. and went to sleep in the costume shop while the party continued on. Before she went to sleep, Sigrid had written in her journal how annoyed she was that the cast members were being so loud when she wanted to turn in for the night, and how she wanted to wake up early and leave the building before she was caught by security, who would make their patrol of the hall around 11 a.m. Sigrid wrote about how she was nervous about being caught because she had already been warned numerous times by security in the past about sleeping in the building. Sigrid was spotted the next day in the afternoon, where an acquaintance had seen her at a movie theater about 15 miles away from Trenton State. It's never been verified which movie theater this actually was. However, that was the last confirmed sighting of the 25-year-old. At 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night, 22-year-old security guard Thomas Kokotilo was doing his normal round around the campus, and as he approached the south entrance of Kendall Hall, he saw a familiar sight: a green bicycle chained to the railing outside the doors. This caught Thomas's attention, as the building should have been completely unoccupied at that time of night, so Thomas made his way around to the front entrance, assuming he would come upon a student trespasser inside and need to escort them out. The front entrance was locked, and Thomas took his keys out and opened the doors and made his way inside the dark building. All the lights were off except for the red lights of the emergency exit signs that lit up the hallway, and he recalled having a very eerie feeling as he traveled down the hallways towards the main stage entrance. As he approached the stage, Thomas spotted what looked to be a white canvas sheet lying in the middle of the stage next to the piano, surrounded by pools of blood. Thomas climbed onto the stage, and using his flashlight, he could see that underneath the sheet was a nude human body. He drew his weapon, fearing the killer was still inside, and called for backup. When authorities arrived, they discovered that the body was of a woman, and she had been hit about the head, with the damage to her face being so extensive that they could not immediately identify her by features alone. The woman's head had been covered by either a blood-soaked shirt or scarf, with police theorizing that this might have been done to muffle her screams, and some reports state that her wrists had even been bound at one point. Blood was everywhere, from the floors to the piano and music sheets, and there had been a trail of blood from the piano to where the body was left in the middle of the stage, as if she had been dragged to that spot. The bottoms of the woman's feet were bloody and caked with mud. At the scene, police collected a few of the woman's personal effects, and through this, they were able to identify her as Sigrid Stevenson. They found her backpack, which contained her journal, sketchbook, and a large amount of clothing. Inside the backpack, they also found her wallet, which held Sigrid's ID, $7 in cash, and a handful of traveler's checks and a can of beans. Due to the money and the traveler's checks being left at the scene, a robbery gone wrong was quickly ruled out. Dr. Stanley Austin, the supervisor of the graduate music program, was brought in as a second confirmation that the woman lying dead on the stage was in fact Sigrid Stevenson, according to the ID, but he was only able to identify her as Sigrid based on her hair, as the damage done to her face was too extensive. The murder weapon, which has only ever been described as a blunt instrument, was missing from the scene, and authorities speculated that it could have been a heavy piece of wood that had been under the piano to balance it, as it was missing after the murder. They believe that Sigrid had been playing the piano when the attacker snuck up behind her, surprising her. Unfortunately, no evidence leading to who the killer might be was left behind at the scene. Surprisingly, there were no fingerprints, footprints, fibers, or hair left behind. Police read through every entry of Sigrid's diary, and while they acknowledged it as thorough and well written, none of the entries had provided any clues as to who may have wanted to harm Sigrid. They turned to faculty and staff in order to see if they had any information about what may have happened, and Dr. Stanley Austin told them a very important piece of information: that the white canvas sheet covering Sigrid was a piano cover, and it hadn't belonged to the piano that Sigrid was playing that night. In fact, it hadn't belonged in that building at all. The piano Sigrid was playing was old and essentially worthless, so they didn't feel the need to cover it. However, a $10,000 piano located in Bray Hall across campus had a white canvas piano cover, and Dr. Austin confirmed that the cover laying across Sigrid's body was the one from Bray Hall. Another staff member came forward to state that he had seen the white cover on the $10,000 piano only a week prior. Unlike Kendall Hall, Bray Hall was newer and had functioning locks, and in order to get to the concert hall where the cover had been, one would need exactly 3 keys to enter. One key to enter Bray Hall, another key to enter into the concert hall, and a final key to get into Kendall Hall. There were no windows at Bray Hall that one could break and enter into the building. The question was, who had all 3 keys in order to enter and retrieve the piano cover, and why? Police theorized that the killer had retrieved the piano cover in order to use it to remove Sigrid's body, but that he had changed his mind. Dr. Austin had only 2 keys, and the janitors on staff also only had 2 keys. The only people in possession of all 3 keys were the 12 campus police officers and the 7 security guards. Dr. Austin was adamant that no one could enter Bray Hall without a key and stated to authorities, quote, "Believe me, if there was a way that anyone could have gotten access to the concert room and the piano, Sigrid would have found it," end quote. Campus law enforcement was being looked at closely for 2 reasons. One, for the fact that they were the only ones who had all 3 keys in order to get the piano cover, and 2, because the marks around Sigrid's wrist that had left a deep symmetrical furrow appeared to possibly be from handcuffs. Behind Sigrid's back were 2 arm-width spots free from blood, which some investigators feel could have been due to her being handcuffed from behind. Ewing Township Police ordered that all members of the campus police and security, as well as all officers from Ewing Township themselves, turn in their handcuffs and batons for testing to see if any trace evidence such as blood could have been found. They did find blood on 1 pair of handcuffs from 1 officer, but it was determined to have been from an arrest prior to Sigrid's murder. Many officers were given polygraph tests, and a handful came back as inconclusive, while the rest came back as truthful. The 2 officers on duty at Trenton the night of the murder participated in the polygraphs, and both had passed. However, one of the officers on duty that day later was speaking to another officer in the locker room at the police station, and this man told the other officer that he had killed Sigrid. The officer who had claimed that he had been involved in the murder had incidents come to light that he had been drinking often and had gone to parties where he had been harassing women. When spoken to, the officer stated that he hadn't ever met or spoken to Sigrid, and they hadn't pressed him any further. While police were beginning their investigation, Sigrid's body was taken to the Mercer County Medical Office for an autopsy. There, they discovered the extent of her wounds. She had suffered multiple lacerations to the face and scalp and had a fractured skull. In total, Sigrid had 12 deep scalp wounds, and her cause of death were blood clots due to excessive bleeding. In addition, Sigrid had 2 broken ribs, a broken nose, and bruising on her chest and elbows. They performed a vaginal swab on Sigrid, which showed that there were sperm cells present, but they were dead heads of sperm, which indicated that she had most likely been sexually assaulted. They estimated Sigrid's time of death to be anywhere between 7:30 and 10 p.m. Authorities began to interview friends and acquaintances of Sigrid to dive deeper into her life and background. However, very few people had any insight to share. Dr. Austin had told police that he knew Sigrid decently well, and all the time he had known her, she had never expressed to him any worries about her safety or well-being. Police were quick to interview the cast of the play, as well as all those who had attended the play on the day of her death. Still, no one was able to offer much. However, a man by the name of Sidney Porcelain came forward, stating that he may be able to help. Sidney was part of the play and had loosely known Sigrid, as he had met her the prior July during play rehearsals and had been impressed by her talents on the piano. Sidney had asked Sigrid if she would play the piano for some songs he wanted to record, and she had agreed. However, she had left town for her hitchhiking vacation shortly afterward and hadn't had a chance to follow through. Sidney had stated that Sigrid was very friendly and had often told her business to anyone and everyone, and he could understand how she would be, quote, taken advantage of, and how she was the natural victim type. Sidney went on to tell investigators that he was a self-proclaimed psychic and that he had even helped the police in prior cases using his psychic skill. He had assisted police in the John List case at one point, but he got his visions embarrassingly wrong. He had told authorities in the List case how John was dead and somewhere nearby, but as it turned out, John was alive and well and later arrested for the murders of his entire family. During questioning for Sigrid's murder, Sidney had produced an alibi and had offered his psychic services in the case, and surprisingly, authorities agreed. He asked to hold Sigrid's personal possessions in order to pick up vibrations from them, and police offered him her backpack. The police had literally handed over the physical evidence to be touched by someone that they were questioning. Sidney held the backpack and stated that he had no prior knowledge of the killing, which seemed impossible, as the facts of the case were reported on heavily in the papers at the time, but claimed that he sensed she had met a violent death by being beaten, and that he kept seeing the letter S in his mind. He stated that he couldn't be sure if the letter S referred to the killer or Sigrid herself. He went on to say that the killer was someone who worked with wire, and that on the day of Sigrid's death, he had a bad premonition, but he hadn't known what it meant, and he didn't elaborate further. Another cast member of the play was interviewed, and she stated that she had seen Sigrid on the day of the play and had spoken to her. She claimed that during the first act of the play, Sigrid was in good spirits and was happy and vivacious. But later, after the play was over, Sigrid's mood had soured, and she seemed to be feeling down. Sigrid told the woman that she had gotten into an argument with a man, and that she had more or less lost the argument. It couldn't be determined who this man was who had argued with Sigrid, but it is believed that he was a member of the cast or crew of the play. A member of the play named Chuck came on police's radar years after the murder, and he was seriously considered as a suspect. Chuck's role in the play was of a police officer, and part of his costume was handcuffs and a baton, which had never been taken in for testing around the time of Sigrid's death. However, when Sigrid's personal belongings were inventoried, they discovered a playbill, and inside the playbill, under the names of cast and crew, Chuck's name was circled, and underneath she had written, "Nice man, gave me a beer." It is known that Chuck and Sigrid had at least one prior interaction with one another. When the cast was getting ready for the play one evening, Chuck had walked into the dressing room where Sigrid had been sleeping, and when he entered, he startled her awake. The two had a lengthy conversation. However, police don't know the nature of the conversation or what was said. Some officers had wondered if the man that Sigrid had a confrontation with on the last night she was alive could have been Chuck. In 2011, an ex-girlfriend of Chuck's came forward claiming that she believed he had something to do with the murder in 1977. This ex-girlfriend claimed that when she had dated Chuck in the 1980s, he had been incredibly abusive towards her, and one night after a particularly brutal beating, Chuck had said to her that he could kill her and get away with it because I've done it before. However, Chuck had passed a polygraph around the time of the murder. Furthermore, around the time of this claim, investigators were still working on the case of Sigrid's murder and had recovered partial DNA from the vaginal swab from the autopsy. This DNA wasn't enough to test against any suspect profile, however, but they had another idea. They unknotted the knots in the blouse that had been tied around Sigrid's head, and they were able to gather a better DNA profile from the skin cells left behind. As this was going on, Chuck happened to die in 2016, and eager to get a sample of his DNA to test against, they had to think fast. Authorities had contacted Chuck's brother to see if they could run the DNA profile against his own DNA, and he had agreed. When the results came back, the sample from the knots did not match Chuck, and he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. In recent years, other suspects have come to the forefront of the investigation, namely 2 suspects who happened to work for Trenton State College. One was a lighting technician whose mood had abruptly changed after the murder. He is being considered for a handful of reasons. One being that when Sigrid was playing the piano the night that she died, the lights of the stage must have been turned on for her to see the keys of the piano and to read the sheet music. When her body was found, all the lights had been turned off, and only an experienced lighting technician would have been able to work the lights in the theater, as they were complex. 2, because he had keys to the theaters, and when he was initially interviewed and asked about the keys, he had claimed that he didn't believe he had them. When police reminded him that he did in fact have the keys to the building as part of his job, he suddenly remembered having them and handed them over to authorities. This man was also polygraphed and passed, and he provided a statement to police. While he was initially ruled out as a suspect due to passing the polygraph, detectives in recent years aren't so keen to disregard him and would like to re-interview him again. Another possible suspect being considered as a good candidate as the killer was a maintenance worker for Trenton State College in 1977. He also had keys to the building, and he was known to have frequent interactions with Sigrid and had often let her into the building after hours to sleep or play the piano. He had been spotted with Sigrid many times in the months leading up to the murder by both students and campus police officers alike. When investigators searched through Sigrid's belongings shortly after her death, they had discovered his name, address, and phone number written down in her diary, and it was believed that the two had some form of a relationship, though the nature of the relationship is still unknown. Soon after Sigrid was killed, the maintenance worker, who was known to have substance abuse problems, was fired from Trenton, and shortly after was admitted to a detox program. While he was also polygraphed and passed, he was not investigated thoroughly back in the 1970s, and recent detectives working on the case would like to look into this man further. Sigrid Miller Stevenson was laid to rest in Princeton Cemetery under a headstone with a simple inscription that read, Sigrid M. Stevenson, 1952 to 1977. In the aftermath of her death, an entry was placed in the school yearbook to memorialize her. However, sadly, her name was misspelled. A scholarship in her name was also put into effect, but it doesn't seem to exist anymore. It seems like Trenton State College more or less forgot about Sigrid, with her murder transforming from a real-life story of an innocent, brutally murdered woman taken too soon to a sort of vague ghost story told year after year about a haunted theater and eerie happenings within Kendall Hall. Each year, the story changes a little bit, and new students who hear the tale of the haunted theater no longer even associate it with a living, breathing human who had died at the hands of a heartless perpetrator, but rather a tale to share to spook their friends and peers. It's been 47 years since Sigrid was murdered, and she has never received the justice that she deserves. There are numerous possible suspects in this case, many who fit the bill for who could have killed Sigrid, yet no one has ever been able to narrow down exactly who it could have been. With the lack of evidence left at the scene, it makes it difficult, but there were some decent clues to work with. Surprisingly, there were no footprints leading away from the area, no fingerprints left at the scene, no hair or any other evidence. What we were left with was a partial DNA sample, vague ideas about handcuffs or batons being involved in the killing, and a possible argument before the crime, and one vague confession by an officer. I believe that Sigrid's murder had to have been at the hands of either a staff member of the school or an officer. We have the furrows in Sigrid's wrists that look like they could have come from handcuffs, as they were two symmetrical lines imprinted deep into her skin, and the lack of blood behind her back, as if she had been restrained. Some believe that the murder weapon could have been a baton, if not the piece of wood that had held up the piano. One officer had even confessed to the murder to another officer, and it's amazing to me that they hadn't investigated him thoroughly after this confession, but they more so took him at his word. Other officers claimed that he had issues with drinking and harassing women at parties, but when he was spoken to, he simply claimed that he was kidding about what he had said to the other officer in the locker room, and it seems the entire thing was just shoved under the rug. We also have the possibility of a maintenance worker or a lighting technician, which both seem like good and viable suspects. The lighting technician was elusive about owning the keys when he was interviewed, and only revealed that he had had them after he was pressed further by police. On top of that, it would take an experienced lighting tech to be able to turn the lights on and off at Kendall Hall, and the lights had been turned off when Sigrid was found, and they must have been on before her death in order for her to play the piano. In fact, the lights were so difficult to use that when Sigrid's body was discovered, officers had to call in a special technician to join them in order to even get lighting to investigate the crime scene. I know that it's easy to underestimate the difficulty of theater lights, thinking it's just the flip of a switch, but I can say as a former theater kid who worked the lights of a stage, it is very complex and not easy to figure out if you haven't been taught or have some kind of experience. Whoever had killed her at least had some concept of how to work the lighting system, and had all three keys to enter both Kendall Hall and Bray Hall to retrieve the piano cover. Next, we have the maintenance worker who reportedly had some kind of a relationship with Sigrid, as he had been known to bend over backwards for her, and his name, address, and phone number were written down in her diary. He was known to let her into the building to sleep, despite it being against the rules, and his job would be at stake. And he was routinely seen speaking with Sigrid in the months leading up to her death. I find it strange that he was fired from his job soon after Sigrid's death, but it's never been stated in any sources why this might be or what led to his termination. We do know that he had issues with substance abuse and was admitted to a detox program after his termination, and it's possible that substance abuse could have played a part in the murder, if he was responsible. With this murder happening 47 years ago, police are on borrowed time to find and charge their suspect if they are able to find one who checks all the boxes. I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I think one of the best chances at possibly getting this case solved would be to run the DNA profile they have against possible matches in GEDmatch, in hopes that a relative of the killer might be linked. We know they have enough of a DNA profile that they were able to rule out Chuck as a suspect when compared to his brother's DNA, so it seems like they would have enough to make a match to a relative of the killer if one should be in the system. With as much time that has passed and each day that goes by, justice is slowly being evaded in the case of Sigrid Stevenson. Thankfully, there has been renewed interest in her case by New Jersey detectives, some who hadn't even been born at the time of Sigrid's death, and they are actively pursuing her killer and combing through the police files and reviewing the evidence. Last year, the Netflix reboot of Unsolved Mysteries also brought about a renewed interest in the case when they featured Sigrid's murder on season 4, episode 4, and it's managed to highlight her case in the media once again and reach the ears of those who may never have heard of her or her death. All it takes sometimes is reaching that one person who might know something to crack a case wide open. And I can only hope that the more we shine a light on Sigrid's death, the more opportunity there is for that one person to remember something from that September day in 1977 and come forward. Thank you so much for listening to Across State Lines, and we will be back next week to dive into another unsolved case. Please follow or subscribe to Across State Lines on your podcast listening platform so that way new episodes will drop directly into your listening feed. If you'd like to rate or review Across State Lines on whatever platform you listen to, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and join us again next week.